Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion titled 5 Years of MBS as Crown Prince, the Impact of State Security Reforms on the Human Rights Situation in Saudi Arabia. My name is Ramzi Kais, and I am a Legal and Policy Officer at MENA Rights Group, a Geneva-based legal advocacy organization that works to defend and promote human rights and fundamental freedoms in the MENA region. And I'm joined by our wonderful panelists, Abdullah Al-Ouda, Dina Al-Hadloul, and Bethany Al-Haidari. Thank you so much for all our panelists for joining and being part of this event. And I hope it's not too early, Abdullah and Bethany, where you are. And thank you also to everyone who's following on Twitter and YouTube stream. In this live panel discussion, which is held on the anniversary of Hamad bin Salman's ascension to the position of Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, we hope with the little time that we have that we can look back and assess the transformations that MBS has ushered in to Saudi Arabia since he took power in June 2017, and to also examine the impact of these transformations on human rights in the kingdom. Before I open up the discussion to the panelists, which I'm sure we're all eager to hear from, I'd like to first briefly shed light on and share the findings of a report that was published today by MENA Rights Group. The report is titled "The Saudi Presidency of State Security, an Arm of Repression in the Crown Prince's Kingdom." And the report sheds light on the role of one particular state security body, the Presidency of State Security, which is a new state security apparatus that was established just 1 month after MBS came to power and has been responsible in perpetuating a widespread and systematic pattern of human rights violations across Saudi Arabia. MENA Rights Group's report affirms that since 2017, the SSP has been granted greater powers and responsibilities, allowing it to operate without any judicial oversight and with complete impunity. The report further asserts that the establishment of the SSP and the Public Prosecution Office, which was also established around the time that MBS came into power in 2017, allowed the Saudi authorities to unleash a wave of arrests against individuals who were deemed to be critical of MBS's policies, including peaceful dissidents, human rights defenders, lawyers, academics, and journalists. These efforts to silence any form of peaceful criticism were further sealed with the passing and the adoption of a new counterterrorism framework in November 2017, which effectively criminalized a wide range of acts of free speech. As a result of this new counterterrorism law being passed in November 2017, the Saudi Public Prosecution Office and the Saudi Specialized Criminal Court have played a prominent role in the arbitrary detention of human rights defenders, peaceful critics, sentencing them to lengthy prison terms. The MENA Rights Group's report also further outlines the SSP, or the State Security Presidency's mode of operation and its collaboration with both the Public Prosecution Office and the Saudi Specialized Criminal Court against peaceful dissidents and critics and human rights defenders across Saudi Arabia. And it documents their mode of operation from the mode of arrest until their sentencing. And it finds that all of the SSP, the Public Prosecution Office, and the Specialized Criminal Court have systematically operated in the following manner. First, individuals who are engaging in acts that are protected under the right to freedom of expression and opinion are arrested by Mabahat agents who operate under the authority of the SSP. And those arrested are typically abducted from their homes by individuals typically dressed in civilian clothing, without being provided with an arrest warrant nor with a justification for those arrests. Those arrested are then taken to secret detention facilities or to SSP-run prisons, where they are forcibly disappeared and tortured as a way of extracting self-incriminating confessions. Disappeared individuals often only reappear several weeks or even months after their initial arrests, before the Saudi Public Prosecution Office, where they are charged with security-related or terrorism offenses based on torture-tainted confessions. And the Public Prosecution Office then uses these torture-tainted confessions in trials before the Specialized Criminal Court, which accepts these confessions and which also lacks the independence and is unduly influenced by both the executive authority and the Public Prosecution Office. And following an unfair trial, which often takes place in secret and routinely violates the defendant's due process rights, those brought before the SSC are sentenced to long prison sentences, often on the sole basis of confessions obtained under torture by the SSP. MENA Rights Group's report concludes by stating that Saudi authorities must amend or repeal these draconian laws, such as the ones establishing the SSP, the Public Prosecution Office, and the counterterrorism law, which under the guise of combating terrorism only serves to prohibit the right to exercise fundamental freedoms within the kingdom and enforces a culture of silence. Without these significant institutional, legal, and political reforms, the SSP and the various bodies constituting Saudi Arabia's security apparatus will continue to grossly violate human rights in the kingdom, according to the report. These are the findings of the report, and they're available on MENA Rights Group's website, menarights.org. You can read the report and find out more about particularly the presidency of state security. Now, I'd like to open up the discussion to our panelists. Thank you so much again for being here. And Abdullah, I'd like to start with you. Abdullah, you are the Research Director for Saudi Arabia and the UAE at Democracy for the Arab World Now, or DAWN, an organization that was founded by the late journalist Jamal Khashoggi and that aims to investigate human rights abuses in a number of countries in the MENA region. And you're also a co-founder and the General Secretary of the National Assembly Party, a pro-democracy Saudi opposition party established in exile. Abdullah, I'd like to ask you a two-part question. First, looking at the larger picture, what have been the most significant political changes in Saudi Arabia since MBS came to power? And how have these changes impacted the overall climate of repression in the kingdom? And secondly, if I may, as you know, and as maybe we all know, we're witnessing rather significant changes, both at the foreign and at the national level in Saudi Arabia. At a foreign level, on the one hand, we have US President Joe Biden's plans to meet with MBS in July, marking a backtrack on his vows to hold MBS accountable and effectively ending Saudi Arabia's pariah status, so to speak. But also internally at the state security level, we are witnessing some changes within the structure of the presidency of state security, perhaps, with the recent appointment of Ahmed bin Abdulaziz Al Isa as the director of the General Investigative Directorate, or Al-Mabahith. So I'm interested in hearing from you, what might the impact of this be on human rights situation in Saudi Arabia?
Thank you so much for having us, Ramzi, and thank you for MENA Rights for the great report on state security. Happy to see this report about state security published because it actually sheds light not just on the structure of state security, the presidency of state security, but also the practices and the changes, and try to track down the elements that actually made it happen and continues to make it exist. So I think the general question about the structure of the presidency of state security is, as we know, that the state security apparatuses did not start with MBS. There has been always the General Interrogations Office, which is Al-Mabahith Al-Amma in Arabic, and generally that apparatus, Al-Mabahith Al-Amma, that actually historically dealt with political detention and political interrogation, political prisons, was historically part of the Ministry of Interior, and historically under the supervision of the Minister of Interior. And when MBS came to power, there was, when he was Deputy Crown Prince, actually, there was, as you all know, there was this like a huge rivalry between the Crown Prince and Deputy Crown Prince, between the office of Mohammed bin Naif and the office of Mohammed bin Salman. And Mohammed bin Salman was part of the quote-unquote royal court, while Mohammed bin Naif was part of the Ministry of Interior. And these apparatuses were deemed to be really influential and hugely, I don't want to say effective, because this would give a positive impression, but I would say hugely influential. Let's keep it this way. And Mohammed bin Salman decided when he ousted Mohammed bin Naif to get the Ministry of Interior to basically strip the Ministry of Interior from its powers, and one of the major powers was this state security powers, and that's when he decided to create what he called the State Security Office, or the Presidency of State Security, and he actually borrowed the structure and idea from Egypt and elsewhere in the Arab world, where they had for decades state security office. But what's new is that he linked the state security to the royal court instead of the Ministry of Interior. I hope I'm not confusing anybody here. I'm just trying to, start since MBS came to power. And when he did that, he put multiple forces under the state security, and one of the major forces was the General Interrogation Office, al-Mabahath al-Amma, as part of that big umbrella of state security. And he made the head of state security a minister. At the very beginning, from day one, Al-Fariq Abdulaziz Al-Huwairini, or the General Abdulaziz Al-Huwairini, was the head of state security. And I'm coming to the second part of the question in a second here. But when sorry about that. So when this was part of the royal court, they were given extra powers to investigate, to arrest, to interrogate, to actually have even less checks on them. I mean, they have been always. I mean, the Office of General Interrogation has been always abusive, but with MBS, he took it to another level, and he tried to give them this extraterritorial, extra power. He actually also created something that he called the Tiger Team, which is like totally parallel, separate office that actually helped the state security. But the state security is the major actor in regarding to any arrest, detention within Saudi Arabia, and sometimes even abroad, helping abroad. And that was like basically the structure, how it started. That, I mean, the establishment was in July 2017. As you said, it's almost 5 months. Today marked the 5 years since MBS came to power. So he obviously, within less than a month since he came to the office of Crown Prince, he started and established this office of state security. To the second question, I don't want to take much of the time. I know I'm almost done here, but the second part, in brief, there were almost always changes within the state security. MBS is always stripping other people from power, trying to get it to. So the big answer here is the centralization of power, putting everything under his personal hand, under his office. And that's why he created all these two councils, council that he called the Economic Council and the Security Council, and both of them under his own power and under his direct control. And the changes, I mean, the most recent change was just a month ago, about a month ago, when for the first time they kind of created a separation between the Office of Presidency of State Security and Mabahath al-Amma, or General Interrogation. I mean, when since its establishment, the state security was led by Abdulaziz Al-Huwairini, who is the head of the state security, and he was also the head of Mabahath al-Amma, or the head of the general interrogations. And just a month ago, for the first time, they actually a royal decree appointed someone independent, Ahmed Al-Isa, as the head of the general interrogation, or Mabahath al-Amma, under, of course, the state security and under the supervision and control of Abdulaziz Al-Huwairini. For me, I would say this is kind of making Al-Huwairini personally less effective, less of control of everything regarding detention and political prosecution. And for me, I think it reflects on how MBS is trying to sideline Houerini in the long run. I would assume it's related to some of the leaks about how Al-Houerini helped the former former minister Saad Al-Jabri in 2017, I would say, in sending secret messages that it's not safe in Saudi Arabia for people like him and something like that. So when Al-Jabri leaked this information and these messages, I would assume MBS took this as treason from the part of Al-Houerini, and that's why he started to try to sideline Al-Houerini. This is basically the most recent changes. I hope I'm not missing anything of your questions, Ramzi.
No, that's it, Abdullah. And maybe if you'd like to comment on just how, at a foreign level, the changes maybe in the relationship between the U.S. and MBS, if you have any opinions on the impact that might have on either human rights in Saudi Arabia or prospects for accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. Very quickly. So, as you all know, when Biden came to power, he promised to make Saudi Arabia the pariah they are, and to protect Saudi dissidents. And a lot of people within the Saudi community were excited that the conditions of human rights are going to be better, and that it's going to be protected, or at least we have an ally within the White House. And to some extent, yes, there were changes, to be fair. Of course, the Odenai report that actually points finger to MBS and his team was released. Arms sales, what Biden later called them offensive arms sales, were stopped, but defensive were still sold to the Saudis. The Yemen war started to get less brutal, let's put it this way. There were some other changes, and the more obvious change was the direct relationship between Biden, or the office or the White House, and MBS personally, and they never had a call, even until now. They never called. They never had a direct conversation. There was no visits whatsoever. And for MBS, this meant a lot of things. And for the most part, it meant the lack of legitimacy in his part. And he fought, tooth and nail to get this legitimacy by getting this direct relationship with the Biden administration. And because of the Ukraine war, and the increase of the prices of oil, the Biden administration wanted to get that under control for the next elections, and to get also some to get the Saudis and UAE closer to them in the fight against Russia. And this is why the Biden administration kind of started to change their tone about Saudi Arabia, and now going to visit Saudi Arabia. Well, about human rights, whether this is going to affect human rights, absolutely, it's going to affect human rights. MBS will take this as a green light to continue his abuse, green light to continue with detention, prosecution, crackdowns. Let's remember when Boris Johnson visited Saudi Arabia just like 3 months ago, MBS executed 81 people on the same day while Boris Johnson was in Saudi Arabia. So MBS used these visits to legitimize his regime, while at the same time not even decreasing the level of brutality in his part. So this is absolutely bad for the human rights community. but at the same time, it's our chance to pressure the Biden administration to get more and more human rights issues in their agenda, and also to use this relationship to leverage, what we prioritize, which is human rights, getting political detainees released from prison, and lifting the ban from those who are under the travel ban in Saudi Arabia.
Thanks a lot, Abdullah. What I take from yours is that in terms of state security in Saudi Arabia, that the mabahith al-amma and the violations committed by state security had always existed prior to MBS, though maybe it was more controlled within the Ministry of Interior. But with MBS coming into power and it's being moved to the royal court and being put under the SSP, it was provided with more powers, allowing it to act perhaps more comfortably in impunity and in targeting human rights defenders and critics. And then looking now, these changing of ties between the US and Saudi, unfortunately, might predict a worsening in the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia, but also offers a chance to maybe advocate and put human rights on the agenda.
I wish I said that in this way, so I would save like at least 7 or 10 minutes.
But I'd like to move now to more looking kind of from the ground picture to actually looking at the SSP's practices and their patterns and their systematic violation of human rights. And so I'd like to speak to you, or turn to you now, Lina. Lina Al-Hadloul, you're a Saudi human rights activist and defender who fought tirelessly for the release of your sister Loujain, who was arbitrarily detained in Saudi Arabia from May 2018 until February 2021, and who is currently under a travel ban. And you continue to fight as well for the release of prisoners of conscience more generally across Saudi Arabia. And you're also the head of monitoring and communication at Al-Qist for Human Rights, a London-based independent organization working to defend and promote human rights in Saudi Arabia. And you're a member as well of the National Assembly Party. I hope I got that right. Lina, I'd like to ask you about the treatment of human rights defenders and peaceful critics, particularly, and the kind of violations they are subjected to from the moment of their arrests until they are sentenced and held in detention facilities. And I'm wondering, what does that treatment look like, and has it changed over the past 5 years since MBS coming into power?
Thank you very much, Ramzi, and thank you to MENA Rights Group for this panel. And thank you for the report. It's really excellent, and really I encourage everyone to read it. So what do the violations look like? I think that the timeline you had in your introduction summarizes it all. But I'll first begin with saying that given everything Abdullah just said, the country turned into a police state. So there are waves of arrests without any concrete crimes. The people don't really know why they're arrested. There is mass surveillance. So what does this look like? So basically, usually when it's online activism or people who are vocal online, it begins with threats online. So usually, and we even have now, it's almost a joke saying that the black car is waiting for you. So basically, the state security car is waiting for you for whatever you're saying. So it starts with threats. And if it's not online activism, it starts with a direct crackdown. So with the arrest that is arbitrary. So how does this take place? I mean, I have, as Al-Qist, we monitored many cases, but on a personal level, I lived it. So they break into houses, literally, they don't ring, they literally break into houses. They come in, they ask for they don't present themselves, they ask for the person they're looking for. They seize the electronic devices, they search the house, and they make sure to really harass and threaten the rest of the family as well. So making sure that no one will speak afterwards. So once they have the target, once they manage to find the target, in my case, it was my sister Loujain, they leave without saying where they're going, basically. I mean, I remember my mom saying that, she was just begging them to know where Loujain was going, So I can imagine that that's the case for everyone as well. So once they've been arrested, as you said, usually they are incommunicado for a couple of weeks or months. They've forcibly disappeared. And we have cases also where it's years. So, for example, Abdurrahman al-Sathan, who was forcibly disappeared for more than 2 years, and then the family only got 1 minute call. And what's important to note is that during this period of disappearance, that's when the harsh interrogations take place. They're taken to unofficial prisons, which are torture facilities usually. And during this period, it's all kind of tortures, and you have it as well in the report. Flogging, electrocution, waterboarding, sexual harassment, beatings, deprivation of sleep. They literally come at night, they scream at prisoners of conscience just so that they don't sleep, and they leave without even asking anything. They just want them to be exhausted for the next day for interrogations. So that's the period of forced disappearance. And I just want to add something. So in the introduction, usually we say that the torture is only to have false confessions. In many cases, especially for the activists' cases, it was because they were enjoying it, and it was a kind of like they wanted to intimidate them and wanted to show them that they're more powerful than them. So at some point, sometimes it wasn't only about confessions, it was really for the sake of torture. Maybe to have a clear image of how this goes, basically, it's a hotel room where you have men sitting on couches with a chair in the middle, where they're on the chair, and each man comes and they do what they want to the target or to the victim, to the prisoner, basically. And there are no rules. The only rule is not to kill them. This is what we found out. So sometimes they would even faint after torture, but as long as they're not killed, that's the only rule they have, basically. So once, and then this is the disappearance period. And I would say that it really depends on how public the case is for the period. So I think that the ones who have more media or international attention, the disappearance period is shorter, I would say. So, and then they reappear. And just to know that during this period, there are no charges, there is no trial, and there is no family communication. They don't have any lawyer. The family doesn't know where they are. And then when they reappear, usually it's for the trial. And when it's for the trial, that's when they find out about the charges. And surprisingly enough, again, with MBS, since MBS came to power and with his reforms, saying that he's even closer to the international community, that he wants, for Saudi Arabia to respect its international engagements, etc. We were really surprised to see that actually the official charges of many of the activists are being in contact with legitimate and recognized human rights organizations such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. So once they have this trial, it's not a real trial because I wouldn't say they're not allowed to have a lawyer, because some of them are, but it's a lawyer who's appointed by the court. And again, it's the case of many, when they try to impose how they see the defense, the lawyer refuses. So, he gives the defense the court wants, basically. And in some cases, they even refuse to have the torture mentioned. And so they really advise the victims not to have anything mentioned about the torture. So this is, there's the torture during for the disappearance, and there's also torture once they're back to the public space, or once they're allowed to be in contact with their families. And this is the case for almost everyone now. Long periods of solitary confinement. For example, the brother of Abdurrahim al-Hwaiti, Abdurrahim al-Hwaiti was shot dead because he refused to leave his house to make way for Niyam. Shadli al-Hwaiti has been in solitary confinement for 2 years. 2 years of solitary confinement, and he started a hunger strike just because they don't want his family to see him, because they know that he will give evidence of what is happening in prison. So you have solitary confinement, you have medical neglect, which also leads to deaths in prison. And this is also, I mean, something that is really worrying, given that Al-Hamid passed away. And also they know now that it might get media and international attention. So what they do is also sometimes to place prisoners with mentally ill inmates, or that they put them with the takfiris, who are basically extremists, who are going to beat them up, and so that they don't say that it's the state security's problem. It's the internal issues within the different inmates. And then, of course, the trial starts. They find out about the charges. Just because I think that my personal experience gives a lot of what is truly happening. So my sister got her charges, and because she got a lot of media attention and international attention, they changed the charges all of a sudden, without even telling her. So her charges were included being in contact with the EU, the Netherlands, and the UK. And all of a sudden, the UK was removed, because I'm sure, the UK is behind it. They don't want Saudi to mention them as an enemy. So we really see that it's a politicized case, and that there is nothing illegal about it. It's all just to be able to say that, okay, we have an independent judiciary, now they've been sentenced, and you can't do anything about it. So yeah, this is basically how it goes. And then once they're sentenced, it's also an issue, because they're even when they finish their sentences, they're under strict conditions. So usually it's a long-term travel ban. They're not allowed to be public anymore. And also socially, it's also difficult for them, because they feel a bit isolated. It's very difficult for, people to be associated with them. They've been sentenced as terrorists, so people don't want to be seen with terrorists, basically. So it's very difficult for them also to have jobs, to live normally after their prison sentence. I hope I answered the question.
No, you did. Thank you, Lina, for describing the pattern of repression and the brutal violations involved. I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that, because we know too that Saudi authorities and state security services in particular have engaged in targeting not just prisoners of conscience, but their families as well. And I'm wondering how exactly does this targeting of prisoners' families, or the families of those arrested, take place? And perhaps, in your opinion, for what end? Like, what does that serve, and why do you think the Saudi authorities engage in these practices?
Yeah. Well, I'll maybe first start with the reason is that, of course, they want to enforce this, atmosphere of fear in the country, and so everyone is silent about everything, even about their closest relatives, because there are travel bans. It's illegal travel bans, and we see that now it's a real trend. It's not only released activists that are put under travel bans, also the families. Dr. Abdullah is here, his family, I don't know, it's more than 17 members of his family who are under travel ban, kids also. My family is on a travel ban. And the most difficult part of it is to challenge it, because there's nothing legal about it. There's not even, they don't want to give you a paper to tell you that you're on a travel ban. So how do you challenge this? And they'll keep denying it. So of course, people then are scared to be on a travel ban. They're scared, to have this as kind of, they're threatening them in the long term to be arrested. There are also many cases where, when families or relatives speak about the conditions of their relatives in prison, they're themselves summoned to the state security, and they have to sign a paper saying that they won't be speaking about it anymore. You also have many Twitter accounts who have been suspended, or the state security asks for them to deactivate their account and to stop speaking about the case. And again, I think that how our family, also socially, it's very difficult to say that you're the daughter or the mother or the brother of a political prisoner, because you will be isolated, you will be, seen badly. So yes, there is a culture of fear and silence now because of all these means, and they managed, actually. It's very difficult for us more and more to get information from the inside because they did everything to silence people. So yes, it's collective punishment. It has become a norm now.
Thanks, Lina, for going through that and describing it. And it seems like from what is being said from both you, Lina, and Abdullah, that in light of both the system of governance, the status of the state security, and the lack of independence of the judiciary, the lack of accountability for any of these crimes will continue to be a major obstacle to any form of justice or positive change in the human rights situation that you'd like to see. And on that note, I'd like to turn to Bethany Al-Haidari. Bethany, you hold a PhD in international human rights law focused on Saudi Arabia, where you conducted research for 8 years on the ground. And you're also the Saudi case manager at the Freedom Initiative, working to release political prisoners. And you also work as a senior fellow on Saudi Arabia at the Human Rights Foundation. Bethany, I'd like to ask you that in light of all that we know about these patterns of human rights violations being committed in Saudi Arabia, what international accountability mechanisms or avenues are available to respond to these violations? And also, what are the limitations to these mechanisms and avenues? And as another part of the question, perhaps what is the best course of action to go about pursuing accountability in light of the limitations that we see with the international accountability mechanisms available?
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming out and speaking, and also for organizing this. And I will just reiterate what Lina said, that it is an excellent report, and hope that everybody takes the time to read through it. As my colleagues have mentioned, and as the report actually highlights, egregious human rights violations continue to happen at the hands of the state security presidency in Saudi Arabia. Now, normally for accountability mechanisms to really function, they would be available within the jurisdiction where the violations are occurring. However, in the context of a judiciary and a security apparatus that are set up with the sole purpose of keeping an unelected regime in power, while at that level, even rule of law, independence of the judiciary, and the concept of justice itself is effectively non-existent. Ideally, the state should have mechanisms. However, as we've seen in several cases, Lina's sister, Lujain al-Hadlua, was an excellent example of this, as was Aziz al-Yusuf and several others. When torture and violations of state security officers are reported to the judiciary, they're ignored or brushed aside almost entirely. This was also the case for Jamal Khashoggi's murderers when the trial occurred on Saudi soil. It was not an exercise of justice for Jamal. It was a secret trial. Names were not released, and those who were actually culpable for his murder were found innocent of the crime. So a recent report found that the individuals who are allegedly charged live in luxury villas in Riyadh and are still visited by the head of state security himself, Abdulaziz al-Huwairini. And I think this is an important context to understand why the international response is so important. So we do have the global Magnitsky sanctions, and these allow blocking and revoking of visas and blocking property and interest of those engaged in extrajudicial killings, torture, or other gross violations of human rights against individuals who are seeking to expose illegal activity of government officials or those who exercise internationally recognized human rights and freedoms. I think something important with this is, at least in the case of the United States, is that these can be submitted by civil society organizations for consideration by the Secretary of the Treasury in consultation with the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. And all of the organizations that are present here today have worked directly with victims of the Saudi government on submitting these recommendations against perpetrators. And I do think that this is an important step forward, and they are available in the US, Canada, and in some of Europe. In the United States as well, in 2021, the Khashoggi ban was announced. This is another mechanism. It actually falls under U.S. immigration law that exists in INA 21283C of the Immigration and Nationality Act, but it allows State Department to impose visa restrictions on individuals who are believed to be directly engaged in serious extraterritorial counter-dissident activities. Again, these recommendations can be submitted to the State Department directly, and I do believe that they are helpful in ensuring that perpetrators are not coming on U.S. soil to continue to threaten activists. Hoping that other countries will also follow in implementing similar measures within their jurisdiction. But there are several limitations, as you mentioned. The first is that, as you can see from the report, the structure of the Saudi Arabian system is a dictatorship, and everybody is essentially answering to one individual. failure to follow those orders can place someone's life at risk. And it's very difficult to go after the main perpetrator, as they are often protected by immunity as heads of state. So it's still important to hold those involved accountable, but we have to remember that those who are actually making the orders, and we need to address that we don't really have a way to protect against dictators when they are heads of state. The other issue is that people do have to risk their lives and their personal safety to report these violations from on the ground in Saudi Arabia. And this makes it difficult to get information of perpetrators. However, the more names of perpetrators that we get, especially at the civil society organizations, the more helpful we can be in holding human rights violators accountable. Another problem is that these legal mechanisms, these accountability mechanisms, are implemented after the fact. So I do believe that we need to put pressure and introduce legislation that actually becomes a preventative mechanism so these violations don't actually occur. And again, we have to note the role that politics play. We're speaking about accountability when in a number of days, the President of the United States of America will be holding a meeting where Mohammed bin Salman is present, who a report released by the Biden administration to the public earlier last year found to be culpable for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Remembering that Khashoggi was a Washington Post reporter who lived not too far from the White House. And it sends quite a frightening message to our community working on human rights and accountability in Saudi Arabia. So governments need to hold this regime accountable, but it's not limited to governments. I think accountability also looks like celebrities, star athletes, tourists, and businesses who are dealing with this regime, as they are equally failing to hold the regime accountable when they engage in business with the state, and they are ensuring that the Saudi government is protected from real accountability. So I believe that these legal mechanisms are important. They do need to be adapted and to have more teeth. But accountability goes beyond just, these legal mechanisms and government responsibility. It does go to businesses and those who are engaging with the regime.
Thanks a lot, Bethany, for describing those mechanisms and also their limitations. What I take from maybe what you said is that, at least for now, at the US level, there seems to be two mechanisms, such as the Magnitsky Act and the Khashoggi ban, that may be used to pursue some form of accountability for certain against some perpetrators of human rights violations, but that these mechanisms as well pose limitations, such as the risk that they put people at, especially if you're reporting from a dictatorship. Also, the role of politics and foreign policy in influencing whether accountability is achievable or not. And they're also not preventative. So human rights violations keep on happening. And so, taking that from you, I think I'd like to, in the 15 minutes that we have left, maybe to also pose this question to Abdullah and Lina, and maybe to you as well, Bethany, coming back, which is that seeing that we are individuals and organizations, outside of Saudi Arabia, what do you think is the most effective way that you can counter these human rights violations, or work to halt, prevent, or put pressure on the government to either stop committing human rights violations, reform certain laws, or release political prisoners, many of whom are arbitrarily detained or haven't been charged, or have been charged and sentenced to lengthy prison sentences that are, that are based on charges based on their exercise of freedom of expression. So maybe beyond the ones mentioned with Bethany, because he did bring up issues like the role of business, the role of athletes and celebrities. And Lina did mention that in some cases where there is attention on people's cases, the period of enforced appearances does last less. So there seems to be other effective strategies or tools that could be used. And I'm wondering from all three of you, as people who have worked a lot on Saudi Arabia, on human rights in Saudi Arabia, what you believe to be are some of the most effective mechanisms or tools that individuals and organizations could use to work to prevent these violations or stop them. Maybe we can start in the same order, like Abdullah, Lina, Bethany, if that works. Or if anyone has something, please jump in.
I'll start then. So I think it's a package. I mean, the answer to this is a package of political, legal, and media works. And sometimes, in order for the work to be effective, it has to use all these mechanisms. The media is to pressure, to call violations what they are, to document them in the first place, because in order to expose them, in order to report them, you have to document them to make sure that they are accurate, and you have to know what happens in the ground, and this is a central part for going forward. And then, in addition to this, you have to have the political pressure, which is important also. But this political pressure, from my humble experience, would never work without the media pressure, without politicians know that the people know about these violations. The people are concerned about them in order for politicians to work on them or to take them seriously. And in addition to this, the legal mechanisms, which, as you said, they are important, and they are. I would divide them into two mechanisms to, for example, to sanction violators of human rights, to try to put them under pressure, to send their files to international community, UN, etc. And the second part is the legal proceedings through courts, which can be cases in Europe, cases here in the US, using every legal mechanism available to make the perpetrators accountable. And that's why, for example, you have multiple cases in Europe against those who were involved in torture in multiple countries. And you have cases here in the US, for example, the case of Al-Jabri, the case of Don and Khadija Jenkins, and you have other cases in Canada as well, if I'm not mistaken. So these three avenues are really important to make the perpetrators accountable and to get what we need, which is having something to pressure the autocrats with. Because if they think that all you do is just write on Twitter or just do things, they will just they will flood Twitter with their own bots, with their own control of algorithms, with their pressure to Twitter itself, as they did many times, or even infiltrate Twitter as they once did. So I think we have to have multiple avenues that we can pressure the autocrats and the tyrants with.
Thanks, Abdullah. And I think something that comes through from what you're saying is just the importance of both the legal, political, and media approach of being comprehensive and complementary. One on its own seems it doesn't work, but needs different fronts in order to perhaps push this forward. Lina, maybe we can take your thoughts on this question.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ramzi. Well, actually, I agree with everything Dr. Abdullah said. I'll say that there's the accountability and the concrete procedures for that. But there's also the specific case of MBS, as we're talking about MBS, is that he lacks legitimacy. And what really emboldened him or enabled him is that he presented himself as a reformer to gain this legitimacy and to have the support of the international community. So it's important in different fields to break that image and to really show who he is and to remind of his crimes. And as Bethany was saying, Dr. Bethany was saying, it's not only about media. It's not only about politicians. It's also, everyone. For example, when Messi goes when he represents the tourism ministry in Saudi Arabia, it is whitewashing. So we have to also target these people and tell them, look, if you want to do something that is good, represent the Saudi people instead of representing MBS. Talk about what MBS is doing. When you go to Saudi Arabia, are you allowed to speak? Are you allowed to ask questions? If not, then don't go. So basically, I think, especially for the case of MBS, right now, it's about his image. He's really trying to rehabilitate himself as a reformer again, that, it was a mistake. Khashoggi was a mistake. And also what we see now, there's a new trend of prisoners of conscience who are used in prisons to show a fake image of prisons. So they're being filmed. I mean, my own friends, my Twitter accounts, they've been forcibly disappeared for almost a year. And now we see them on television where they're being used to show a fake image of prisons. So it's all about image. They really want to have this, they have a facade that we have to break in order for the perpetrators, including MBS, to be broken, basically. So yeah, play with the image, and the game of narratives is the most important thing we have now.
Thank you, Lina, for that. Yeah, that brings in a very good point about the point of narrative and legitimacy that seems to have been maybe a key staple of MBS's messaging since coming to power. Bethany, maybe we can come to you about other thoughts you have on strategies to counter human rights violations, maybe beyond even the legal aspects.
Yeah, I agree with both, and I would just kind of reiterate, I was planning on saying that the major struggle that we faced in dealing with even government agencies and offices, as well as members of Congress and just your general population, is that this reform narrative has actually been quite successful. And I think you can see that too, is that following the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi government was investing millions of dollars into PR firms and comms firms to improve the image. And that number and the most recently released contracts has substantially declined. And I think that's kind of indicative of them kind of lifting their hands and being like, we don't need as much help as we used to. And I think that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, individuals who are privileged and who visit as celebrities don't get the full picture of what it's like to live on the ground. And beyond being a Saudi, what it's like to live as a migrant worker or as a resident, there are some really harsh realities. So I think that it's really important that, individuals who are outside and do have the freedom to speak are given the platform like you're doing here. But that doesn't seem to be what happens. So I'm hoping that media outlets will continue to engage with Saudis and those who are impacted directly by repression, rather than those who are from the privileged elites who are trying to paint a different picture. And I think that once that happens, and as we continue to give a voice to those who've been impacted, hopefully we can counter this narrative. Otherwise, we're just hitting a wall. We're kind of hitting a wall in our engagement with advocacy, as people are saying, well, women are allowed to drive now, and they're not aware of the complexities of the Saudi legal system and how it actually works in practice, and how what is said and even laws that are written are not even enforced, or maybe there for alternative purposes. So, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest battles that we have, is countering those false narratives. But I do think that people need to continue to engage. If they have claims to damages in any jurisdiction outside of Saudi Arabia against officials, they should be filing those. And there should be law firms that are standing up and lawyers that are standing up and educating people on what their rights are and what the possibilities are, and getting creative about how they're doing litigation in the United States and in Europe. Because I do think that those have an impact, and I do think they're incredibly strategic. And hopefully there will be some people who have been impacted that are walking away with damages claims and other cases and victories against the regime.
Thanks, Bethany, for that. And from you and Lina and you as well, the way you're framing it, seems that the role of narrative is something that seems to be perhaps one where that needs to be countered by giving voices to Saudis, not political elites, and also maybe with lawyers and law firms recognizing the role that they could play in supporting victims of human rights violations. And what I take from all of you in this kind of speaking of the tools is just how different approaches are interdependent on each other. And really the narrative needs to be countered, but also there are also legal mechanisms and media mechanisms and countering sports washing that's taking place as a way to truly show the reality of the human rights situation in the kingdom. As we're approaching our end of the session, I want to thank you all for this panel discussion, for really giving us an overview of the role of state security. Abdullah, with you, we kind of got the larger picture of what changes were brought with MBS, particularly at the state security level, with regards to impunity and the actions of the state security apparatus, but also maybe what we might expect in light of the changing foreign policy ties at the US-Saudi level as well. And with Lina, we got really an in-depth analysis or in-depth take on what happens on the ground when people are arrested and targeted by state security, reflecting the brutality of these violations, their widespread nature, and the ways in which they form a systematic pattern, particularly between various state institutions, the judiciary, as well as state security, as well as the prosecution, in really committing these patterns of human rights violations. And with Bethany, we got kind of what's available in terms of accountability mechanisms, what can we pursue, what can we do, but also what can we know about the limitations of these mechanisms and how we can counter them. So I want to thank you guys all so much for this discussion, and I invite everyone who's watching this discussion to check out our report on the presidency of state security, which goes into more detail into the state security apparatus, but also the complicity of other state institutions, including the public prosecution, the judiciary, in committing these widespread patterns of human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. So thank you all, Lina, thank you, Abdullah, and thank you, Bethany, for this. Bye-bye.
Thank you again so much.